Hey folks, Carolyn here to tell you just a little bit about the Games and Online Harassment Hotline. It's a free text message-based, confidential emotional support hotline that was created specifically for the gaming community. So whether you're a player, a developer, a streamer, a competitor, any part of the gaming community, the hotline is here for you, ready to provide emotional support or help finding the referrals and resources that you may need. Visit gameshotline.org for more information.
The way that this film, without putting things in bold flashing light, but the way that this film indicts everything about capitalism is absolutely outstanding. When you have Jacob unable to lift his arms and has to ask Monica to help him undress, the toll that it takes on your body to be among the working classes.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Carolyn Pettit, filling in for Anita Sarkeesian this week. She is currently having some sort of Snake Plissken-like Escape from LA style adventure in the wastelands of LA. I like to imagine she's riding a giant wave right about now.
I want to circle back to this, Carol.
And I'm joined by a woman who often looks at chicken butts just for the sheer pleasure of it, Ebony Adams. Hey, Ebony.
The money is also good. I should say that, yeah, I do it because I love it, but also the money is fantastic. P.S. I did actually look up chicken sexing
yes.
after watching this movie.
Oh, we'll talk about that because it's the sort of thing you might think, oh, that's just super easy, right? But it's not at all. Like, it takes skill and intuition and, practice. As our little chicken sexing conversation might indicate, this week we are going to be talking about writer-director Lee Isaac Chung's lovely new film, Minari. But before we get to that, we have a special guest joining us this week. Our guest is the film critic Walter Chaw. He is critic for the website filmfreakcentral.net. I have to say, I have been eagerly scheming in my head and hoping to somehow make this happen for some time. So I personally could not be more thrilled to have Walter joining us on the show this week. At filmfreakcentral.net, he has not only established a massive body of work over the past 20 plus years, but in my view has also established himself as one of our most important and engaging critical voices on film. Like all the best critics, in my opinion, Walter has his own distinctive ethic as a critic, and he writes unapologetically and beautifully from a viewpoint that is both deeply informed by his rich knowledge and love for cinema, as well as his personal convictions about what it means to be a person in this world and how film can illuminate our lives. This means that even when I don't completely agree with Walter about a film, I'm always better for having read his reaction to it, as it invariably gives me more to think about and helps deepen my own appreciation for the art form of cinema. Walter, hello. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Welcome.
What an amazing introduction. I'm really touched by that. And I was sort of telling Ebony and Carol before we started that I've been asked to talk about this movie before with others, but I've turned every invitation down until this one, just for the opportunity to be able to talk with you. So,
were you lying at Wake at Night being like, God, if that Feminist Frequency Radio invite doesn't come in, I'm going to have wasted all my opportunities to talk about this movie. Like, God, when are they going to reach out?
I would have been a little bit relieved maybe not to talk about it. It's such a personal feeling.
Sure.
Film for me. It's wrenching almost, but but for the right cause, of course.
Yeah. Before we get into Minari, I want to talk a little bit about another thing that you're doing. So you're based in Denver, right?
I am.
You live in the beautiful city of Denver, Colorado. So one of the best experiences, the most humanizing experiences I've had in recent weeks in the midst of this isolating, kind of in some ways dehumanizing experience of quarantine that I'm going through and that many of us are going through right now, was that a few weeks ago, I watched the wonderful Ingmar Bergman film, The Seventh Seal, which has so much to say about our fleeting lives on this planet and what can make them meaningful and valuable. And then the next day, I got to sit in on a conversation between you and the wonderful Natasha Lyonne, all about the Seventh Seal. And that's actually part of an ongoing series that you're doing in conjunction with the Denver Public Library, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that series and some of the amazing people you've had join you for those conversations?
Yeah, isn't she amazing, Natasha Lyonne? She was extraordinary, and she's such a hero of mine, such a survivor. I've taken so much strength from her, and her frankness and her willingness to just sort of lay it all out there again for us. With the context of the Seventh Seal. And it's funny because I reached out to her and I asked her if she wanted to come do this with me. And, we're thinking about a movie to do. I was like, you want to do this Bergman film, the Seventh Seal? I know you love it. And she's like, yeah, I'll do it. I'm horny for Bergman, she says. Yes, that's exactly what I want to do. This series started at the beginning of this pandemic when the Denver Library was looking for ways to expand their at-home programming. And so I have a friend who works there as part of their programming team. He's since retired, Chris Loffelmacher, Nate Georgi now. He asked me to come host it. I had done some things for the library in the past, hosting screenings, guided discussions, things like that. And so I was like, yeah, man, sure. For you, I'll do it again. There's just a few people in the world that I'll come out of my shell for. And so we started that in April of last year, and we've done it, almost every week. We've taken weeks here and there off. It started out just with like 30 people and me, just talking about movies from the Canopy streaming site. And then I'm very woefully tired of the sound of my own voice, and I know exactly what I'm going to say all the time. It's exhausting. So I started asking people to come join me to do it, and I've been very lucky to have guests like Guillermo del Toro and Ryan Johnson and Peter Ramsey, Natasha Lyonne. Upcoming in April, we have Patton Oswalt. This Saturday we have, I don't know when this is going to air, but this Saturday we have Lee Wannell, the director of Invisible Man. He's coming to do the John Carpenter's The Thing. So your call out of Snake Plissken, right on point there.
Yes.
But yeah, he's coming to do that, and then Barbara Crampton the week after is coming to do Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
Oh my God!
I know. And then in April it's Patton Oswalt for the first week. So we have a few great guests lined up that I can't really talk about yet. We haven't decided what movies to do and stuff, but it's all for the library. It's all free. It's all digital. A couple weeks after we do it, they will edit it and clean it up a little bit, and then upload it to their non-monetized YouTube channel, the Denver Public Library. So there are quite a few up there already. Edgar Wright talking about Blood and Black Lace and all those things. And if you do what I do with those, and then you kind of put your hand up whenever I appear, and then mute it down, it's really a good experience. You got to turn it back up. Hey, I can't listen to my own voice. I apologize to all of your listeners today.
No, I mean, I'm the same way with my own. I have the exact same aversion, but it really is a treat. And I encourage all the film lovers who listen to FFR to give that. Again, registration is free. It is, I think, sometimes limited, but it's free. So just. And if you miss one, you can always catch it after the fact a few weeks later on the YouTube channel. But they're really insightful and lively and wonderful conversations about films with fantastic and phenomenal people. So do check that out. All right, well, let's talk about Minari. So inspired by writer-director Lee Isaac Chung's own childhood on a farm in Arkansas, Minari tells the story of the Yi family. Jacob Yi, played by Stephen Yun in what I think is yet another remarkable performance. He absolutely really came onto the scene for me in Burning, as somebody who was not a watcher of The Walking Dead. It was like that for me was like my Stephen Yun sort of revelation, was Burning. But in this film, as Jacob Yi, he pursues his own version of the American dream as he pours all of his energy into creating a farm that can grow and sell Korean vegetables to markets in nearby cities. Jacob's ambition in pursuit of what may be a failed enterprise puts considerable strain on his marriage, and his wife Monica yearns for him to focus on other priorities. The film also acknowledges the full and complex humanity of the family's two children, older daughter Anne, and 9-year-old son David. When Monica's mother comes to stay with the family, she's nothing like the quote-unquote real grandmothers David has seen on TV, with her prickly demeanor, her love of card games, and use of trash talk. Minari is a film of quiet observation, but one in which deep currents of emotion are plainly visible. There are many films about American families, but very few of them feel as insightful and true as this one. I guess where I want to start with this film is, I do want to get around to talking about how whiteness is portrayed and how whiteness functions in this film, because I think it's absolutely fascinating and as true and spot on, as anything else about this film. But what I think one thing that I didn't expect, to be honest, going into this film, but was really wonderful for me, is I sort of thought, well, this Korean family is going to face like the big obstacle is going to be external racism, overt hostile racism of the kind we so often see in films, about Black people or people of color in the U.S. And so we as white people speaking, will still be present as like a really active antagonist in the film, but and it's not that way at all. Like the real tension, the dramatic obstacles come from within the family itself. Primarily, they come from Jacob's ambition and I guess I wonder if I feel like there's a way in which we as white people, not all individual white people, but whiteness is like a construct or a collective, are sort of more comfortable with narratives in which we remain present and active in some real overt way, even if only as the racist antagonistic aggressors, because then we still have a meaningful presence and role in the dramatic force of the film. And so I'm maybe part of what, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association or whatever, kind of objected to about this film or made them only make it eligible for nomination as a foreign language film, but not as dramatic Best Picture, was the way that it focuses so primarily, on the Yi family, and that, whiteness is again, it's important. It has a role to play, but it's very peripheral in a lot of ways to the core dramatic arc, I think, of what happens within the Yi family. And so this film really is primarily and fully concerned with the humanity of the Yi family exclusively. And I think that's really remarkable.
Ebony?
That was just so good. I needed to take a second to take it in. You're absolutely correct there, Carol. I had the same reaction, which meant that when we do have those, few moments in which race or ethnicity, is brought to the forefront, it's even more lacerating because we've been lulled into a place in which, we would be forgiven for assuming it's not going to happen, that they are safe from it. They are safely away from these centers of whiteness or the machinery of white supremacy. They're going to be, on their little 50 acres without a mule, they will be away from this. And then we have that scene in the church fellowship hall with the two kids, and they each have an interaction with another young child. And it is so brutal to watch the ways in which they try and understand what they're being asked. In the case of David, why is your face so flat? Or in the case of Anne, will you tell me when I, hit on some Korean? And she makes this girl talking, or just stereotypical, incredibly racist, sounds, and you're like, this is worse because I was no longer expecting this. And I should have remembered that this is always already present in the lives of people of color. And, just the struggle for these young kids to understand what's being asked of them, but also the complete lack of guile they have to not impute maliciousness to the asker, right? And so to actually become friends with or friendly with the people who are asking these questions, oh my God. I wanted to be please don't become friends with these little assholes. And yet That is, perhaps my grown-up cynicism, not recognizing that these young kids have internalized these, bullshit ideas, but are not yet to blame for parroting them back. But yeah, I was ready to drop kick a kid.
Yeah, I think you touched on something really fascinating for me about Minari and the presence of whiteness. To use Carol's term in the film, is that even in their home, they're drinking Mountain Dew because they think that it's healthy. And that there's this idea that David doesn't like his grandmother because she's not like the grandmothers that he sees on television, that he has now been imprinted with, in this culture. If you want to assimilate, if you want to belong to this culture, it's a really personal story for me. I was born in Colorado, in Golden. I was raised in a really Norman Rockwell sort of upbringing situation in downtown Golden. Lots of fun stories I could tell you. It was really great. I earned pennies for catching flies, penny a head, and then I would release them in the rival of the barbershop owners down the street. It was, and the barber that was paying me to do this was the mayor at the time, and it was like a really small town. I would take all my earnings and go to the Five and Dime. It was called that, and I'd buy Silly Putty and comic books. That was my upbringing, but I didn't speak English.
Holy shit!
I didn't speak English until I was 6 or 7, and because my parents didn't want to teach me English, because I would learn it with an accent. But so that gave me a bad stutter, and so ironically, I couldn't make friends anyway. But the why is your face so flat? Why stop me when I say something in Chinese? I've had those conversations. That was a common thing. And when we talk about people working things out and their kids and everything, it's like, honestly, a lot of most adults in the United States have not worked out their racism either. And it's like, yeah, right. I don't have to tell you that, but it's like the desire immediately to put a malicious intent behind some racism, I think is part of why I've been so depressed, for the last 10 years or so, longer, but yeah, there is room, I think, for us to have, and we should have this sort of more nuanced conversation if we ever get to a place where we're not actually worried about getting murdered as we're walking to the grocery store. There should be room to talk about this thing where, my father-in-law passed away a couple years ago, and he was like literally the kindest person I've ever met, kindest person, white as the day is long, very white. And so some of his attitudes, I think, were, we would say quite obviously racist, but extraordinarily kind and generous, and not examined, And it's, yes, we should put people's feet to the fire and say, you must examine your racism. You must examine the systemic racism and misogyny and intolerance of white American culture, in which we are all steeped and guilty of. We're all racist. We grew up in this culture. We are racist. That we unavoidably. And yet, are we able to separate the nuance of intent? I'm not sure that white people have earned that yet, but
right.
Minari does wrestle with it to say, that little kid that was looking at him weird during, church and saw grandma stealing money from the, donation bin and, all that. He turns out to be a friend. It's like, what? When I was growing up, I had friends, I'm sure, that were like that. And I played along. I did the short round voice when they asked me to. I did the long duck dong when they asked me to. I made a joke out of my own race because I was ashamed of it because of the way that American culture portrays Asianness. And so I wanted to be on the side of the winner. I wanted to assimilate, right? I've never dated an Asian woman. I've never, I used to try to walk apart from my family when we're out walking together. When I went to college, I didn't join any, Pacific groups, even though I was recruited to them, or join the Asian fraternities, although I was recruited, because I wanted to divorce myself as much as possible. I'm an American. Don't you get it? I'm white. I'm as white as you are. But at a certain point, you do run up against this idea that because I look the way I look, I will never actually be accepted as white ever. So at some point, I got to stop hating who I am, and that's sort of been the later journey that I think we all go on at some point. And Minari is lacerating in terms of that, because I was not nice to my grandmother. I was not. I was really intolerant of her. I was intolerant of their weaknesses. I was intolerant of all this, all these cultural signifiers and the way that they talked. I didn't want to speak Mandarin in public. I I was mad at my parents for doing that. I was mad at them for having me here. I was mad, and looking back, I sort of feel now all the pain that I caused them and all the separations that I forced and the pain of that, the real harm that I've done to my family because of this culture and because of me.
When David says, when he runs into his sister's room and doesn't want to sleep in his room with his grandmother and says she smells like Korea, it is in its way even more hurtful to watch, to witness, almost, than when he, passes her a bowl of his urine to drink. He resists so much, the what she represents, which is this like visible and resistant difference. And we don't see him, like actively trying to, talk differently than his parents or, wear different things. We don't see him trying to don, or cloak himself in whiteness. He's still perhaps too young to do that in ways in which we recognize, but he does recognize, the difference that his grandmother represents and the fact that she celebrates it and it has, is not trying to be anything other than what she is. And you can see how confusing that is for him and the way he has to struggle to sort of, figure out like where she fits in the family and what that means his family is, if there's a place for her in it.
That's another place I think that the presence of whiteness inserts itself in the family dynamic is because she says at one point, your parents never used to fight like this.
Right.
I'm back in Korea. There are all these concerns and everything and all these pressures that are out there. And, when they befriend the Will Patton character, even though he's, a little bit loony and he's been being made fun of in town. I remember growing up around people that I thought were a little bit weird and a little bit on the outside that I never understood why my parents befriended them. I do now, watching Minari, that these are, we are all an outcast family now. We are all on the outside. And that it's only these people who understand our experience in any meaningful way. The dominant culture rejects us for one reason or another. And so we, find brother and sisterhood in that. And I think that's really compelling to me. I talked with a long time ago with Melvin Van Peebles about why he thought that African American culture bonded so completely with Asian American culture, especially the kung fu movies and stuff around that period of time. And he said kind of a lot of the same thing and really molded my thinking around it to say, look, these are all stories of people that are not welcome, that are looked down upon in some way, that band together and fight back. And that's the story. And it's taken me, man, I'm really, really old. I'll bet you that I'm older than the two of you combined. It's taken me all of my life. It's taken me all of my life to get to this place where I'm ready to fight. Because being raised Asian, you can skate. You can skate under the model minority. You can be quiet. You can, do all this stuff. We're more pitied than hated for the most part. But that's changing because we're getting more visible, and I used to be afraid of that, and I guess I'm not afraid anymore. I guess I'm just angry now.
I dig it. You bring up Will Patton, and I'm not going to spend undue time talking about the one white dude in this movie, but Will Patton is so great, y'all. Every performance in this film could not have been better. I mean, Monica. There are scenes with Monica that will stop your breath. The way that she conveys emotion with just the tiniest movement of her hand or the wetness of her eyes holding back tears, just absolutely amazing. I read an article in which Steven Yeun is talking about how he was more nervous to portray Jacob in this movie than he was with any of his other roles. And it was partly because he had to navigate how to construct a performance that was not stereotypical and yet was legible as Asian dad, And it was just this really fascinating insight into his creative process and the way he's like, I wanted to do something that was whose contours were recognizable and authentic for whatever, value of authentic you want to use here, but that nevertheless, did not conveniently just slot itself into like stereotypes, that could be deployed against the very community that we're trying to uplift and celebrate here. He's such a thoughtful actor. And there's not a wasted expression or movement throughout this movie, which is also wonderful because, I think most of the people in the film, other than, Stephen Yeun, Monica, Sunja, Grandma, there were a lot of non-actors in this film.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alan S. Kim is, the young actor who plays David is so crucial to the success of this film.
Critics' Choice winner, Alan Kim.
I mean, because, obviously child performances are really hit or miss, but I mean, David has that kid physicality where exasperation about something, exasperation about grandma or whatever, just fills his whole body sometimes, where he's just ugh. And it's so everything else in this film, it just rings so true. I mean, such that, none of it is, stereotypical at all, but it's all very recognizably real and true and honest. And I think I also love. So I read a piece in The Guardian where they kind of an interview with Lee Isaac Chung, and he, in some of his earlier films, Lucky Life and Abigail Harm, which I haven't seen, he says those films were made under the influence of, as he puts it, more minimal filmmakers like Tarkovsky and Kiarostami. And and he says this film is more, is a shift away from that. And he's I'm watching I love Billy Wilder these days. But I still did feel personally the influence of a kind of minimalist approach here, in that I felt like the camera really just allows us to observe these moments taking place in a way that really emphasizes the environment, for one, be it the sun, the golden rays of the sun and the green grass, the environment, or the interior of their modest home. And I don't know, I all these things kind of contribute to give the film a very just grounded quality that, for me, made it ring all the more true somehow. I really felt it's almost like I'm just sort of watching these lives play out in front of me in a really believable way.
Yeah, it's really inobtrusive and lovely. I think he gives people time. He lets his cast breathe, which is great. We have these interactions that are allowed to have a beginning and a middle and an ending, without editing to force emotion or overscoring to force a feeling, or to tell the story. I don't like expository editing. I don't like expository scoring. I really like, if you trust the actors, let it go. If you trust the writing, let it go. I'm with you. I think it stays out of the way because the story is quintessentially American, and I think you mentioned the Hollywood foreign press and all of that. And honestly, I've been doing this for 20 some years. I've never met anybody who's actually written for that. For the Hollywood foreign press, I think I might have interacted with one at a junket once, and they're all these 50ish Finnish women in pantsuits. I'm just
Walter coming in hot.
They don't write for the Guardian. They don't write for the London Times. They write for penny savers. These equivalent things that you pick up, and it started like the Oscars started as a way to get people to come to your party. So it's we'll give you an award if you show up, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, and they're sure, we like awards and we like to drink, so here we come. And that's the root of it. But this idea, and I think a lot of people misunderstand when they say, okay, well, look, it is a foreign language film. It's mostly in foreign language. It's well, there's an othering that's happening that should, why is the Hollywood foreign press using English as the default,
right? And
everything else is foreign? Why is that? And again, it's just because they're just sort of patsies. They're handmaidens to the to Hollywood, and it's grotesque and peculiar. It's also why I don't watch award shows, and I haven't. Luckily for years, I don't have to cover it, and so I don't watch it. But it's the reason why we can have movies like Green Book winning Best Picture when there's Spike Lee just sitting there, or you can have Ron Howard winning an Oscar while Robert Altman and David Lynch are in the audience. This is what we're even thinking. And when we look at like the major festivals in the United States too, we have the same sort of glad handing. The last Telluride that they had, they had Charlie Kaufman there as a guest. And instead of giving him an award for career achievement, they gave it to Rooney Mara. Telluride.
Wow.
Supposedly the quintess, and whatever, Rooney Mara. That's fine. That's fine. She eats pie real good. Whatever. But you have Charlie Kaufman sitting right there. More than that, you've had all of these unbelievable artists from around the world, and they don't even get any kind of airtime here. And so I don't have any solutions. I just have a lot of complaining. But it's like there's. Yeah, it's troubling and it's painful, as an Asian American to continually be put sort of in the corner, like poor Kelly Marie Tran in the last Star Wars movie, where she's home doing homework. And you know what? The number of times that I couldn't go play with my friends because I was home doing homework, I can't tell you how particularly painful that is. Where's Rose? Well, she's doing research. Like, yeah, it's the Asians, right? I mean, we did our homework, and we did our homework well enough to know what you're saying when you say stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so, anyway.
Yeah.
J.J. Abrams can go fuck himself. So that's and the thing that you were saying, Ebony, about or Carol, I think you both touched on it, is this idea of not portraying a stereotypical Asian dad. And Sia, with her movie Music. I don't know. Have you guys seen that? Have you seen Music?
No. Hell no. I mean, I read your review of it.
Pirate it.
Which was fantastic. Oh, really?
Watch it for free, because don't give her any more money. But
I will. I'm
what's
sure as hell not
about
paying
that
for it.
is, in addition to all of the real harm that she does the autistic community, and overall she does that the disabled community. In addition to that, peculiar white magical thinking that's happening with the super rich, who's like, I care about them, so I'm gonna fix it by making 10 music videos here. There's an Asian dad, there's a Chinese dad in that movie who is super abusive, who actually ends up murdering his son, who is I think Latino. It's not clear, but non-conforming. And he wants his son, the Asian dad, mean Asian dad, he's a dry cleaner, by the way, wants the son to be a boxer, and is really disappointed that the son doesn't want to fight and wants to dance instead. And I'm like, first of all, don't do that, Sia. Second of all, speaking as a person who had an Asian dad, I'm not an Asian dad in return. I hope not. My kids will tell me later that I am, but that my Asian dad would have been like, you will grow up to be a dry cleaner after you go to college, or you will go to college and get your PhD. In the meantime, you're going to spend all the rest of your time being a dry cleaner. That's the Asian dad experience. All right, it is not the sort of yelling, screaming, my boy's going to be a boxer. What are you even talking about? And so it's like, to see a movie like Minari is, for me, it was like, where are my royalties, man? Because this is so painfully true. This is so painfully close to my experience. My dad came here on academic scholarship. So did my mom. My dad, was going for geochemical engineering. Ended up as he owned a silversmithing joint. He sold fossils and T-shirts to tourists, and he fixed their jewelry. That's what he did, and that's what I did since I was 4 years old. I was bringing people up on an old cash register. That was my whole life, until college. And it's like, I'm telling you right now that Minari nailed it. They nail it. The sort of like, we spent all of our money to move here. We gave up everything to come here, and we are gambling everything for this business. And we're hoping that we can sell some of these things. And we can find a community here, and we hope that our kids don't grow up to resent us, and they still speak some of the language. And we hope that, it's so much hope and so much courage in all of these decisions in this film. And it breaks my heart. And I'm not sure that anybody other than an Asian American can tell this story in this way. And it was remarkable to watch.
You wrote a really, really moving review and sort of personal reflection on Minari, which I know Carol is going to make sure that we put in the show notes. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I just was really, I found it very moving. The way that you said this film just captures so accurately everything, about, sort of like immigrant families, about like the personal striving versus what it does to a family, the way that like gender gets mixed up in it, the ways in which, kids have this like really fractured understanding of who they are and who their parents want them to be, successful in this white American culture while still retaining, all of the elements of the home culture. And so encourage people to read your writing on Minari, because it was absolutely fantastic. And as I said, so moving. Carol, this movie, quintessential Carol movie.
Yeah.
Quintessential right. Carol movie, which means, for a while I was wondering, because I don't process human emotion well. And I was like, this film is going to break my fucking heart. Precisely because it doesn't do, like the roller coaster right. of like pacing and, like manufactured emotion that so many films give us. And I'm like, you can't give me time to be in my own head, because it's not a safe place to be. This film, I was so ready for something horrible to happen. And although there are, occasional moments where things don't go wrong, when the water stops running from the well and Jacob has to, run a hose from the family pipe, even before the fire at the end. Oh, we should say this is spoiler alert.
It's, every FFR
it's not like a twist.
Cast.
Right, exactly. But because it plays out at the pace of regular life, I almost was more anxious because I was so afraid and waiting for the other shoe to drop. I seriously thought it was going to be like a Jean de Florette situation. Did you ever see Jean de Florette?
I did not, but I know exactly what you mean in that sense. That, like, we're so trained by the standard, like 3-act, whatever movie formula to expect, crisis, to expect that when things are too, calm or not like telegraphing enough, like you need to feel tension here, that means like, I really need to feel tension because it means things are going to just take a terrible U-turn any moment. And yeah, this is not a film that cares to cater to those kinds of expectations, and thank goodness it doesn't. But that's not to say. I mean, certainly toward the end of the film, as Jacob's sort of ambition is really driving this wedge in his marriage and in the family, it is. It is devastating in its own way. Like we see Jacob in a scene toward the end of the film. He and Monica are having this kind of like state of the relationship, state of the family conversation, and he says, first he says like of his kid, because Monica wants him to, to like maybe we can move back to California, we can pay off our debts easily there, and but that would mean, of course, Jacob having to give up the farm. And he says, on one hand, that his kids, quote, they need to see me succeed at something for once. But then, almost like just a moment later, he says, even if I fail, I have to finish what I started. And it's like that is to me. I mean, it's quintessentially, true to this family's experience, but also like in a larger sense, that is the patriarchal story of the failure of so many men, right? Who cannot, like, who feel this pressure to be the breadwinner, the success on their own terms, all of these things, even if that ambition sort of breaks the very thing that for which they are, they believe they are striving. So I don't know.
That's the real
Yeah.
That's the real tragedy of the patriarchy. It's hard to call something a tragedy that causes so much pain and suffering, but there's a legacy to that expectation. I mean, I've never once in my life felt successful. Never once. Nothing. And I keep climbing and I keep finding new peaks. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna feel successful if I get a book published. I'm gonna feel successful if I do this. If I, get an article in the New York Times. If I do this. And every single peak, whether it's in business, whether it's in writing and everything, nothing has changed that. Nothing has filled that gap, that expectation gap. I mean, I think the most devastating thing that you can tell a child is that they have potential. It is the most vicious thing that you can tell someone. And there's I didn't go to my high school graduation because my parents said everybody graduates high school, especially in this country. We'll celebrate when you get your doctorate. I'm still waiting. You know what I mean? And it's like I realized at some point somebody asked me, they're like, there's one person that you could show this to or whatever. Who would it be? I'm like, my dad. He died about 15 years ago. And I'm like, there's nothing that fills this hole, and therapy and medication and self-medication and self-loathing and suicide attempts, all of this stuff, nothing has addressed it. Nothing has addressed the space in me, and that's what's planted here in this idea, Carol, that you're talking about achievement, about finally getting to the top of that mountain. There's no top of that freaking mountain. Right. There's no top. There's only more shelves and peaks and valleys, and there's no end to this. And then, what you hope is that you come to the end of your life and you don't look back with a lot of regret. And all I got right now is regret. So I got about 25 years left, and I'm going to do my best to, try to address some of that stuff. But man, I love Jean de Florette. I love its sequel to Men on a String. Yeah.
But I was expecting that sort of like large antagonist figure. Totally. And the villain of this piece, if anything, is it's white supremacy. It's the patriarchy,
capitalism.
The way that this film, without underlining it, without putting things in bold flashing light, but the way that this film indicts everything about capitalism is absolutely outstanding. When you have Jacob unable to lift his arms and has to ask Monica to help him undress because he's been working so hard at chicken sexing, for how many hours a day, how many days a week. And then, in all of his off hours, trying to grow these fruits and vegetables, the toll that it takes on your body to be among the working classes.
Oh, one of my jobs when I was a green writer was I was loading packages at UPS because they had a good health plan, and we were trying to have a kid, and after the first couple nights of loading tons of packages, all night, I had to throw up my arm in the air and I said, "Hey, can you roll me over?" I couldn't roll over on my own. My wife had to pull me to roll over. And I've been in every level of corporate America. I stopped as a vice president of operations for a corporation, and it's diseased. It's a moral atrocity, capitalism. Every level above entry level in any industry job is meant to design further ways, more creative ways to exploit entry-level positions. True. That's it. There's no end goal to capitalism except what we're seeing now, the creation of trillionaires and the creation of a lot of dead people feeding the trillionaires. Yeah. That's it. It's Smog from Lord of the Rings, except everybody else in the valley getting burned up by smog thinks that they're going to be Smog one day. That's perverse. Yeah. It's perverse.
That's why Minari is a better anti-capitalist film than Nomadland. Thanks for listening, everyone.
And if you'd like to talk to Carol more,
yeah. Oh, the internet loves it when I say I think Nomadland is a failure as an anti-capitalist film.
I think it's poverty porn. Can I just throw that out there? I'm going to take some of the heat for you, Carol. I think it's just poverty tourism. And the fact that, Frances McDormand, whom I adore, was giving tours of the van that she used in it online is gross. And the fact that the way that they're promoting that film by sending food packages to critics and stuff, it's gross. It's
So
gross.
are you saying that you will not attend my double feature of 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri and Nomadland? Is that what y'all are saying to me, that I shouldn't even invite you?
You know what?
Okay.
If you're throwing a party, I'm coming. But
Well, that is going to have to do it there for our conversation about Minari. We will be right back to share some freakouts. Hey friends, thanks for listening to FFR. If you enjoy our weekly conversations about the intersection of feminism and pop culture, consider hopping over to patreon.com/femfreak and joining our podcast community. You can get access to exclusive bonus episodes, join our friendly Discord server, participate in polls to help decide topics for future episodes, and more. Plus, you'll be helping us keep bringing FFR to the virtual podcast airwaves. Visit patreon.com/femfreak today. What's your freak out? Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. Walter, what are you freaking out about these days?
I am really excited and ambivalent at the same time about stuff like Raya and Boogie, the Eddie Wong flick, and Minari, of course, and Driveways from this last year as well. The great Andrew On film, a beautiful film, really great. I'm freaking out because Asian Americans for the longest time have been sort of quiet and on the sideline of this stuff, and concurrent with our increased visibility in this culture is a rise in Asian American hate crimes. People pushing down our elders and stuff and killing them on the streets, and that's I think the price that we pay for being more visible. And if that violence, which is of course unconscionable, and just try and push down a lady of any age in front of me, I will have words. But I think if that's the price of entry for Asian Americans to enter into this fight with African Americans and Native Americans and Mexican Americans and Arab Americans in particular, Palestinians, if this is if this is the pain ritual that we must go through as a culture to enter into this fight with you, I'm there for it, and I'm sorry it took us so long to get here. And I'm glad, so glad for Raya. I'm so glad for films like that, which, people are like laying into it because they're saying it's so simple. It's like, children follow plot. You guys, there's something very beautiful about a movie right now talking about trust and the difficulty of trusting people who've just hurt you and continue to hurt you. And the only way through, I think, is through finding that trust. It isn't like an easy thing. It's radical trust is faith. It's having faith in other people. I don't know. I can't confess that I have it. I'm too bitter. I'm too broken up. But having a message like that for a generation that still believes, yeah, and having an all South Asian cast, yeah, yes. Are you kidding me? So I'm freaked out that we're having this conversation, that I get to come on with you, Carol, and you, Ebony, and talk about Minari. That's amazing. That's amazing. And that's something that arguably wouldn't even happen 5 years ago, not the least for which we wouldn't have had a movie like this.
Right.
In the popular conversation. So, there's a lot of pain whenever there's change. And I think that Asian American community is feeling that. My parents, all the way through, Walter, be quiet. Walter, don't vote. Walter, don't get involved. We come from a place of genocides. We come from a place where, they'll get lists. They'll put you on whatever. And for me at this point, I'm like, nope, it's time to fight. I am tired of being quiet. I'm more American than I am Chinese. And the American part of me, it doesn't look kindly upon, being told what to do. So that's what I'm freaking out about.
Walter's setting shit off on this episode of Feminist Frequency Radio. Y'all weren't ready. The people were not ready.
Oh man, absolutely! I'm stoked to see Raya. It's another review of yours that I read that and I'm like, okay, I have to see this film. Like that, it's not necessarily a film that I was like, necessarily something I felt needed to check out. But your review definitely convinced me that that it is something I need to see. So thank you so much for that. Well, you can submit your own freakout at feministfrequency.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT. Thank you so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the last episode of this season, so we'll be off for the next few weeks, but we shall return on April 7th. So on that day at dawn, look to the east. Our show is...
God damn it.
Our show is engineered by Rob Pera. Carrie Stimson provides technical support. Artwork is by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you next time.
Thanks, people.
Bye, everybody.